Hundreds of pounds of marijuana were seized in raids across metro Atlanta.
Well, the GBI says it got dozens of pounds of deadly drugs off the streets during a massive drug trafficking investigation.
At 5:10 a.m., the city of Atlanta, Georgia, was still asleep. The streets were quiet. No vehicles, no movement. Only the distant hum of the highway echoed through the early morning air. In one of the most exclusive gated communities in the city, a 6-acre private estate stood still. Valued at over $18 million, the property belonged to the sitting governor of Georgia, Daniel Whitmore, a man widely known for his hardline stance on border security and fiscal discipline. But that morning everything changed. No sirens, no flashing lights. A convoy of unmarked federal vehicles approached from 3 different directions. Engines shut off almost simultaneously. Doors opened at the same time. More than 31 federal agents from the FBI and moved into position within seconds. Earpieces in, weapons ready, commands were whispered, not shouted. This was not a routine search warrant. This was a level 1 takedown. At exactly 5:12 a.m. the signal was given. The main gate was breached. Tactical teams entered through the front, while support units secured the perimeter. In less than 90 seconds, the entire compound was under federal control. Inside, agents discovered what appeared to be a border control network operations center. The room was dominated by a large interactive map, a digital grid of movement routes constantly updating. Lines flickered across the screen. More than 240 active transit corridors connecting over 60 distribution points. 3 walls were covered with digital displays. Live feeds streamed simultaneously from multiple locations, highways, distribution centers, and what appeared to be security checkpoints across at least 5 states. Georgia, Alabama, Florida, Texas, South Carolina. Every shipment was labeled. Every location was tracked in real time. Governor Whitmore was inside the main residence, just steps from his private office. He did not resist. He said nothing. He was taken into federal custody as agents secured the surrounding area. At that moment, the operation appeared to be unfolding exactly as many within the command unit had expected. A high-level financial investigation, allegations of undisclosed offshore accounts, irregular campaign financing, possible misuse of state resources, serious charges, but not unprecedented. This did not look like the home of a politician under investigation. It looked like a structure built to protect something far beyond money. And within minutes, agents would begin to understand why. Stay with me, because what they uncovered next would change everything. Meanwhile, FBI agents here in Atlanta say they just seized enough drugs to kill millions of people. The agents began a systematic sweep. What they expected to find were financial records, hard drives, documentation, links to offshore accounts. What they found forced an immediate escalation. In an underground storage area concealed behind a row of luxury vehicles, agents discovered the first compartment, a black armored SUV modified far beyond standard specifications. Hidden panels had been welded into the frame. Inside, tightly compressed blocks of cocaine. Field estimates confirmed a weight of more than 400 kilos in that single vehicle alone. Within minutes, more vehicles were opened. By 5:32 a.m., the total had risen to nearly 1.2 tons of cocaine distributed across 6 modified transport vehicles. But that was only the beginning. In the basement, behind what appeared to be a climate-controlled wine storage area, personnel discovered a secondary door, reinforced steel, electronic lock. Once breached, the air inside revealed everything. Chemical, sterile, controlled. More than 900 kilos of fentanyl, carefully packaged and labeled for distribution, were stacked inside sealed containers. This quantity was enough to produce over 450 million lethal doses, a volume capable of impacting populations far beyond the state of Georgia. At 5:47 a.m., financial teams arrived on site. Inside the main residence, behind ordinary food storage shelves, investigators uncovered vacuum-sealed bundles of cash, neatly arranged, documented, categorized. Initial figures: 112 million in cash. But the digital records told a far more alarming story. Encrypted laptops and secure hard drives revealed more than 2,300 transaction flows, spanning multiple states and international borders. Funds originating from state-linked allocations were routed through a series of intermediary accounts, then disappeared into offshore destinations within minutes. Each transfer passed through at least 5 distinct financial layers, each designed to reduce traceability. Shell companies registered in Delaware, Nevada, and offshore jurisdictions formed the backbone of the system. Many shared the same incorporation dates. Some listed the same legal representatives. Others had no verifiable presence at all. More than 43 corporate entities were directly connected to the network. Of those, at least 28 had received payments tied to government-related funding, linked to infrastructure programs, border security expansion, and emergency logistics. Funds were broken into smaller segments: $2.4 million, $3.1 million, $1.88 million per transfer, then reassembled in accounts outside United States jurisdiction. From there, the money was converted, redistributed, and prepared for physical movement. This was flow by design. By 6:05 a.m., a preliminary estimate had been issued. More than $9.1 billion had been moved through this network over a 4-year period. Not a single transaction had been flagged by standard state monitoring systems. No alerts had been triggered. That level of movement required coordination, protection, access. This was no longer about drugs or money. This was infrastructure. If this level of corruption disgusts you the way it should, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what you think should happen next. The president has made it quite clear that if Narat terrorists again are trafficking illegal drugs towards the United, by 6:42 a.m., the focus of the operation had completely shifted. What agents were investigating inside that hidden room was no longer a smuggling ring. It was a control system, a system far beyond the scope of a single property, far beyond the reach of one individual. The ledger recovered from the workstation was transferred to federal analysts for immediate review. Analysts identified more than 18,000 individual shipments recorded over a 3-year period. Within minutes, patterns began to emerge. The encoded identifiers were not random. They were people. At 7:05 a.m., the first cross-match was confirmed. One identifier matched a senior transportation official within the state of Georgia. Another was linked to a regional law enforcement supervisor responsible for federal highway inspections. As analysts continued decoding, the list expanded rapidly. The number reached 33 individuals, not low-level contacts, not outside associates. These were officials with authority. Individuals positioned within systems designed to monitor, inspect, and prevent illegal activity. At the center of it all was Governor Daniel Whitmore. The ledger entries detailed monthly payments structured, consistent, precisely documented. Total monthly distribution $4.2 million. Over 4 years, the payments exceeded $210 million directed to officials with the power to grant access, delay inspections, or redirect enforcement activity. This explained everything. Why shipments moved uninterrupted. Why more than $9.1 billion flowed through the network undetected. Why not a single internal alert was triggered. But the deeper the investigation went, the darker the picture became. Encrypted communication logs revealed direct coordination. Rival smuggling groups attempting to operate in the same regions were intercepted, not by chance but by design. Law enforcement units would arrest them under legitimate charges. Yet those individuals would disappear from the system within hours. By 7:46 a.m., all ambiguity was gone. This was not a network that had infiltrated the government system. This was a network operating through it. The very structures built to enforce the law had been exploited, used to protect, direct, and expand a criminal organization on a national scale. A system, a control point that had remained hidden until now. By 8 a.m., less than 3 hours after the initial breach, the investigation had crossed a critical threshold. What began as a controlled operation at a private compound had now escalated into a large-scale federal response. The decision was made through a secure command channel. This system would not be allowed to operate for another hour. At 8:22 a.m., coordinated arrest warrants were activated across 7 states. Federal teams from the FBI, IC, and financial enforcement units moved simultaneously at every location connected to the border control network. More than 900 federal agents were deployed across 3 states. Pre-approved search warrants were executed at 21 separate locations, all linked through identifiers recovered from the hidden room. Timing was critical. There would be no warning, no time to react. At 8:30 a.m., the first wave hit. In Atlanta, additional personnel connected to the governor's office were taken into custody inside secured government buildings. Offices were sealed. Systems were locked. Digital access points were immediately cut off. At the same time, in Texas, Arizona, and California, tactical units conducted breach operations at identified transit hubs. Warehouses flagged in earlier network analysis were entered without notice. Inside one facility near the southern corridor, personnel recovered more than $18.6 million in cash packaged and prepared for outbound transport. In another case, concealed within legitimate shipments, investigators discovered 42 kilos of high-grade narcotics packaged to avoid detection. By 8:44 a.m., the operation expanded further. Financial enforcement units initiated Phase 2. More than 120 bank accounts, both domestic and international, were immediately frozen. Ongoing transactions, some valued at over $6.3 million, were halted mid-transfer. Entire routing chains collapsed within minutes. The flow was cut. At a suburban location outside Phoenix, a network operator attempted to destroy critical data using industrial shredders and encrypted drive wipes. Agents breached the site within 9 minutes, recovering partially damaged hardware that later proved essential to the case. There was no longer time for the network to protect itself. By 9:05 a.m., the full scale of the takedown was becoming clear. Across all locations, 33 individuals had been taken into custody. Among them were administrative officials, logistics coordinators, and financial intermediaries, each directly tied to the operational structure uncovered just hours earlier. But the most significant impact was not the arrests. It was the shutdown. The border control system was offline. Every known route was disrupted. Every active shipment was halted. Every clearance channel was locked. For the first time in nearly 3 years, the system was no longer operational. Back in Atlanta, the governor was escorted out of custody under federal supervision and transferred to a secure detention facility without public notice. No statements were issued, no cameras, only silence. The same silence that existed before the initial breach. But now everything was different. By 9:20 a.m., the final numbers were confirmed. 9.1 billion tied to the network, 33 arrests, more than 120 financial accounts frozen, millions in cash seized, multiple supply routes dismantled. This system had not just been exposed, it had been broken. And as federal analysts reviewed the final operational map, now filled with inactive nodes and severed connections, one truth remained unavoidable. This was not just the collapse of a network. It was the collapse of a system that had operated in plain sight. A system built on trust and destroyed by betrayal. By 10:05 a.m., the operation was officially declared complete, but the consequences were only beginning. Within hours, federal prosecutors moved forward with precision. Formal indictments were issued against all 33 defendants. The charges were expansive and severe. Conspiracy to distribute narcotics on a nationwide scale. Money laundering exceeding $9.1 billion. Obstruction of justice, abuse of public office. Coordinated involvement in multiple violent criminal activities. The evidence left no room for interpretation, encrypted communications, financial records, operational logs. Every action had been documented over years of activity. For the first time, a system that had functioned in silence was now fully exposed under federal scrutiny. In the days that followed, the internal impact spread rapidly through the remaining structure. Without protection from within, the network's stability collapsed. Smuggling corridors that had once operated without interruption began to fail. Routes that had been carefully maintained for years were suddenly abandoned. Federal agents, no longer obstructed by compromised checkpoints or leaked information, launched follow-up operations across multiple states. Warehouses previously flagged but never accessed were now entered without resistance. Distribution points that had remained active during the initial takedown were systematically dismantled. Within 6 months, the numbers confirmed the scale of the collapse. More than 18 tons of additional narcotics were seized. Over $340 million in assets were recovered. Dozens of secondary arrests were executed, each directly connected to the same operational framework. What had once moved undetected across state lines was now completely disrupted. The structure had depended on internal control, and once that control was removed, it failed. For the public, the shock was immediate and widespread. A sitting governor, trusted officials, a system constructed not to enforce the law but to bypass it. Confidence in institutional oversight was shaken. Questions emerged across multiple states. How long had this been allowed to operate? Who else had access? And how many similar structures remained hidden beneath legitimate authority? For those inside the federal command structure, the conclusion was unmistakable. This case had never been only about narcotics. It was about access. Access to systems designed to regulate movement. Access to information meant to remain secure. access to authority that could override enforcement at critical points. And the moment that access was exposed, the entire operation collapsed. But even as the investigation closed its first phase, analysts continued to review what remained. Fragments of communication, partial transaction chains, unresolved identifiers that did not match any of the 33 arrests. There were still gaps. By late afternoon, a secondary review flagged an anomaly within the recovered system logs, a set of authorization codes that had been active, but never directly linked to any known individual. No name, no agency record, no official clearance history, only activity, limited, precise, and carefully timed. The entry suggested something else had existed within the system. Not part of the financial structure, not part of the logistics chain, but something positioned above it capable of granting access without appearing in any formal registry. A final layer that had not yet been identified. And as investigators began isolating those records, one realization settled across the command center. The system had been broken, but it might not have been fully dismantled.